This video has been kindly sponsored by Babbel. I've gotten a lot of criticism on here for wearing makeup, especially in the last year for some reason. Firstly, I can wear whatever I want because it's my body. Secondly, when it comes to wearing historical fashion or whatever style, there really is no way you should or shouldn't get dressed. It's a form of creative expression and there are no rules. This is your creative opportunity, obviously without doing harm to others. Thirdly, I am not a Victorian. I'm a modern woman who loves historical clothing. I mean, come on, isn't this pretty obvious since I create, edit, and color grade my own videos? Surely an actual Victorian wouldn't know how to do that. And finally, Victorians did wear makeup. And if we look outside of just the Victorians, makeup was very prevalent all over the world in the 19th century and beyond. It's a common myth and misconception that Victorian women in particular didn't wear makeup. Sure, maybe it was meant to look more discreet, but there was not an absence of makeup and cosmetic practices during the time. If you watched my last video, you'll know that I recently went on an adventure of relearning French with the help of the sponsor of today's video, Babbel. Well, turns out a lot of historical cosmetics and makeup practices have French terminology or even were originally written in French. Toilette de Flora, a 1700s book on cosmetics and makeup during the time, is a perfect example of this. I'm finding all sorts of beneficial uses for my learned French lately due to the nature of the topics I'm interested in. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, and it is scientifically proven to help you start speaking a new language in 3 weeks. The lessons are designed by real language teachers, and they teach you practical conversations you can actually use in daily life, like topics such as travel, business, relationships, and more. Babbel has a few different subscriptions to choose from, including a lifetime subscription, and they offer a 20-day money-back guarantee. I've been learning and relearning all types of useful phrases, from basics like comment ça va and je m'appelle voici, and then also more complex topics like communicating in various tenses and talking about the sustainability-related topics that matter to me. L'environnement. Summer is the season of travel, and Babbel is every explorer's must-have travel accessory for a reason, because its simple, bite-sized lessons give you the confidence to speak a new language wherever you go. If you'd like to get 60% off your subscription with Babbel, be sure to check out the link in the description box below. Now, I am no historical makeup expert, nor am I a historian, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that I love to interview experts about topics like these, so that way you can all receive the most thorough information possible, within the span of a shorter video, of course. So today I'd like to welcome Laura Fitzachary. You may have seen her from the Irish working class clothing video that came out last month. Laura is also an expert on historical cosmetics and makeup practices, and I'm so happy to have her here to share this brilliant knowledge with you all.
Hi again, Vazzy. My name is Laura Fitzachary. I am a historical consultant and historian, known for work on fashion, cosmetic and beauty history in Ireland and beyond. But my background actually lies in medieval art and architecture, believe it or not. I work with a variety of clients and I've been published in a few different fields, but most recently on beauty history in 18th century Ireland. Amongst many other interests, I am also a very proud member of the Cosmetic History and Makeup Studies Network. So thank you for having me back, Vazzy.
Can you confirm that Victorians did in fact wear cosmetics or makeup, and what did these practices generally consist of?
When it comes to makeup in the Victorian period, the short answer is yes. But the longer and much more interesting answer, I think, is that makeup throughout the 19th century was just much, much more discreet. It is almost like if you were to do a no makeup look today. That is an extreme version of that is what you would kind of refer to or call Victorian makeup. And there was this social undertone to wearing or applying it. As you know, a lot of us fashion and beauty historians would theorize, it was considered inappropriate to be very heavily made up. And you hear of this quote from Queen Victoria banded about that makeup was vulgar. Now, we don't know for sure if she actually even did say this, but what we do know is that she noted in her diaries that some people she met looked much better with a bit of rouge. So maybe she wasn't completely anti-cosmetics. And of course, makeup is not really a term that you hear until the very late 19th, early 20th century. So when we're referring to cosmetics in Victorian period, it's paints, powders, etc. For women, it was almost a paradox. inappropriate to wear, but still worn just much more covertly. Of course, we have 19th century inventions, scientific breakthroughs to thank for this. We have, for example, when it came to beauty powders, the powder industry completely revolutionized. There were so many homemade recipes now in circulation due to the progression of print culture, paper production and printing, for example, and its dissemination, which was helped by the Industrial Revolution right smack bang in the middle of the 19th century. Couple this with the development of shop-bought cosmetics, and the story of the makeupless Victorians is flipped, really. It's just much, much more discreet than the Georgians would have been, for example. Usually makeup was reserved for the much more, if you're looking at in a French context, the bourgeoisie, so much more of a associated with the ancien regime, and a much more higher and upper aristocratic class would have been using and applying makeup. And that was the case very much in the Georgian period. That changes in the Victorian period, thanks to industrialization and the dissemination of these paper productions, newspapers, etiquette manuals, fashion manuals, telling you how to do your makeup and, of course, what to buy and how to make your own recipes. And that means that you have women from all social classes benefiting from this. And then you have, of course, by the end of the 19th century, you already have certain cosmetics that we still use today being established and, of course, used. According to a one Lola Montez, now I'll be mentioning her a lot, not only because she is Irish, but because she produced one of the most widely spread and influential beauty manuals that I would argue of the 1850s, which is The Arts of Beauty, or Secrets to a Lady's Toilet, which was written in 1858 by her. And Lola Montez was actually an Irish dancer and actress who subsequently became a Spanish dancer and courtesan, and was later known for being a mistress to Ludwig I of Bavaria. What she always championed was the non-use of paints and excessive powders and excessive enameling, and she believed that this idea of brightening the skin and having this finishing touch was luster, a final polish of a lady, and that it came from looking after yourself within, so being quite healthy, going outside a lot, having a really good temperance, and that created this kind of radiant skin which was championed by her, of course without any excessive paints. I remember she notes that nothing writes memento mori on the cheek more than these lead-based paints, which of course were a hangover from the late 18th century. A lot of makeup then was also covertly advertised as health products in order to try and covertly put it on and kind of under the table wear makeup rather than kind of very obviously wearing it. If you had chapped lips, the lip salve that you would need to solve the problem of the chapped lips will have a tinge of red or a tinge of pink in it. And that was your way of sneaking in rosy lips and red lips into something that would fix a health problem, which is chapped lips. In 1886, one Harriet Hubbard Eyre founded the Recamier Manufacturing Company in New York. And incorporated in 1887, the company's product range addressed most of the beauty concerns of the day. And this is the words of the Makeup Museum. If anybody has ever visited the makeupmuseum.com, please do, because they did a fantastic article on Recamier, this company. And what was interesting was the cosmetics were restricted to skincare. So they did not include any decorative products. So no rouge, no lipstick. They still consider them to be paints. And this is as late as the 1880s. They really marketed and sold what they called toilet preparations, which is what cosmetics were referred to a lot. And then later, what was interesting was, despite really pushing this idea of skincare, you don't need cosmetics, it's so good for you, there was actually harmful ingredients inside of the Recamier. And it was found in the Boston Journal of Health in 1902 that parts of the ingredients were corrosive sublimate. And what we now know today was mercury. So the company actually fizzled out by the 1920s. We even had companies trying to push for this more natural look without cosmetics, and still not being quite 100% either. And I think that's why sometimes as well you hear of, because mercury did make its way into some cosmetics, that might even feed into a little bit more of Victorians not wearing makeup at all, because cosmetics were still considered dangerous, and some were, but it wasn't as prevalent as it would have been when it came to, like, you know, lead-based paints and cosmetics in the 18th century. I don't know if you've ever heard of consumptive chic. You do have this willingness for social reform being very much of the 19th century, but there is an uglier side to that, to the Industrial Revolution, seeing very poor sanitation and the terrible living conditions for working class people. So it's no surprise, of course, that diseases were spread, particularly consumption or tuberculosis, which I'm sure you've come across in your research. What has been coined as consumptive chic was really by Carolyn Day in her book of the same name. This really odd and fascinating phenomenon, as you said, with these kind of seeing these side effects of having TB as being considered as beautiful and desirable of a much more upper class society. Pale skin, flushed the cheeks and lips with that tinge of red, these very bright eyes, which would have been considered quite beautiful. I mean, it's very hard to say for certain if they paled the skin and rouged the cheeks to try and emanate this, but there definitely was a trend of having that much more paler skin, achieved by, you see the powders becoming more white as the 1850s and 60s progress, which kind of feeds into that wanting paler skin. The rouge has always been there through the 19th century. It just becomes slightly more pigmented to create that flushed effect. And you also, I've certain sources and theories, some of them contradict each other, some don't, but there's this idea of dilating the pupils and using belladonna to create that. We can't say for absolute sure if women did do that, but there definitely have been sources that it, you know, inclinate that was happening to create that glassy almost look, which would have been associated with anybody who had TB at the time. You also find, though, much more natural versions of these kind of sparkling eyes or lustrous eyes. Lola Montez mentions, because obviously she's in Spain a lot, that Spanish women in the 19th century squeezed a little bit of orange into their eye, a little bit of orange juice into their eye to get it to sparkle. And she says, though it may pain you initially, the effects last for a good while. So this kind of, I don't know if I condone squeezing an orange into your eye at all, but according to Miss Montez, it created that sparkly effect in the eyes. There was a fantastic French professor who is a French professor of cosmetic history in France, who I was speaking to, and he called it tubercular lividity, which is my favorite way of saying consumptive chic. To kind of back up that idea that women were wearing products and they were wearing cosmetic products. This is in France, though, not necessarily in England, but in 1885, one Madame de Guerry wrote in Leçons de coquetterie de hygiène pratique, contrary to the claims of chagrin souls, one has never been less coated in makeup than now. And she says that more than 2 out of 3 women were actually quite happy with their natural features and did not need to use the likes of rice powder, but at least 1/3 of the women she knew very much did. And it's not even a case of having to, but just necessarily wanting to, in their case, to achieve beauty standard. So what I thought I would do for you today, Fazzy, if you're up for it, I thought it'd be a bit more fun, was to go through your face like as if you were applying the makeup itself. English Heritage over in the UK, they've done amazing work on bringing Victoria's skincare routine to the public. They've even created videos on how she would have done her skincare routine, how you would have done a kind of a Victorian-inspired makeup look. They also mentioned, of course, how she would have washed her face, and elderflower water that pops up a few times when you're looking at the sources from the Victorian period. If you couldn't afford elderflower water, rose water, which you can still get your hands on, Fazzy, is a much more cheaper alternative. And this would have been used to cleanse the face, either morning or evening, usually at your dressing table. Chamomile tea was also used to bathe the eyes with, to kind of course, over the eyelid. Think cucumber in a spa vibes, which was to kind of give the eye a nice bit of relaxation. It's very soothing, of course. And then once you've kind of washed, bathed, there was even methods of exfoliation. So I mentioned Lola Montez there yet again. There's a great quote from her, which I think I remember. It's, "Friction is never to be neglected by those who would shine in the courts of beauty." And what she means by that is this polishing the skin, really what we would call exfoliation now, to achieve that whiteness, that paleness, which was the beauty ideal. And so what she would suggest is if you infuse wheat bran, which is well sifted for 4 hours in white wine vinegar, and then add to it 5 yolks of eggs and 2 grains of ambergris, and distill the whole, it should be very carefully corked for about 12 to 15 days, and then it will be fit for use. And so this was then used as a scrub almost to create that whiteness, or as she says, luster and brightness. And we still kind of have a bit of that idea of having very highlighters and kind of shiny skin and radiant skin today. When it came to beauty powder, zinc oxide would have been used in the 19th century. And this is much better than the white painted base of the Georgian period with its lead. Zinc oxide is much more sheer, it's non-toxic, it's still used in the likes of sunscreen today. English Heritage noted that in their videos. They did a fantastic job at going through the actual products themselves. And if you were middle to lower class, you could use anything from oatmeal flour to starch or chalk. And that would have been used then as a cheaper alternative to zinc oxide. Actually, Lola mentions in her work that she wasn't a really big fan of the use of chalk, claiming that people left particles of it on their nose and on their chin. And you don't really get zinc oxide and rice powder, which was huge from the 1860s onwards, until that point, until the mid-19th century. So you have powders being created from the very, very early 1800s onwards to create a much more even skin tone, but they didn't quite get it right. So you would have used the likes of bismuth powder. And what that did was, when you were using powders that came from compounds, they would leave these odd marks in your face, almost like if an actress or somebody on the red carpet wears the wrong kind of powder and the camera flashes and they get that white look on their face. That was also a big problem with the very early powders when gaslighting was invented. And that was a big problem in France. So when gaslighting was invented in the Victorian period, so the empire or over in France, the gaslighting created these odd markings on their face left behind from where the powder was, where the particles were sitting. So zinc oxide and rice powder, once they were perfected by the mid-19th century, that just changed everything again. Much more sheer and created that overall tone that still looked well, depending on the lighting itself. When it came to powder, it was usually anything from a rabbit's foot to a swan down. Swan down was usually the most common, but then again, it was associated with upper middle class and upper society. For working class, anything from just patting on the bit of starch or chalk that you might have had, or a rabbit's foot would have done the job. When you're moving on to your cheeks, for example, so a great opportunity to bring in rouge. Moving on to that flushed look that they wanted to achieve. Rouge was, if you were making it at home, was very typically made from vegetables like beetroot, or anything from geranium leaves. But carmine was also used, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It's from the cochineal beetle, the shell of it ground down to create that lovely vibrant red. It was usually mixed with alcohol and water, and then it was dabbed onto the cheek, usually using your hands. But there was a little jibe that I read in a source that said you can tell when someone's put their rouge on because you can see it on their fingers. So with beetroot, it's going to naturally stain you a little bit. So I think that was a jibe at somebody putting the rouge on with their fingers. You could also put it on with a handkerchief if you wanted to, and that was probably to avoid staining your hands. When it came to rouge, I mean bourgeois, still a well-known cosmetic company today. They had a rouge patented by 1863. So we're talking mid-19th century that these products are already being, one, created by companies that we still know today and being advertised as such throughout the latter half to mid to latter half of the 19th century. As we move on to the eyes themselves, there was very little worn around the eyes, which I think is this link between loose morals and cosmetic use being reinforced. That's not to say that rouge made its way up around the eye area if you had to brighten it up, say you're having a slightly darker eye day, but from what we know from sources themselves, it tended to stay around the cheek, and it migrated up towards the temples towards the end of the 19th century. So wearing a little bit of rouge around the eyes or a little bit of eyeshadow probably wasn't, you can't say for sure that they absolutely did not do that, but it would have been considered inappropriate or socially inappropriate to do that. And it is quite interesting then to read beauty manuals and newspapers from this time, because what's typically used is castor oil brushed onto the brows and eyelashes to give them a long, glossy look. And Miss Montez, who I keep referring to, but her beauty manual is brilliant. She notes that not everyone is fortunate enough to have naturally occurring lashes and brows, and does say that you can help yourself out a little bit. You can fill in your eyebrows a bit as long as it matches your hair color and is done very, very discreetly. So very, again, that kind of no makeup almost. And there's also mentions of burnt cloves or burnt cork used to fill in that eyebrow, or maybe just above the eye. So almost like a very smudged eyeliner if you were to use any, but I would avoid the eyelid completely if you were to try and emanate what we know from the sources for Victorian eye makeup. That's not to say it didn't happen. I think makeup was very slyly being inserted into, and it generally gained so much traction by the end of the 19th century. So it's really, if you're doing like an 1820s 30s look, maybe be a bit careful, but if you're going slightly later, I think you should be fine. Actually, the very first cosmetic creation of mascara, the super fin, or as I've heard my friend say, super fin, which is obviously an Irish version of saying it, it was actually in 1860. Eugène Rimmel, when he came over to London, they had been developing and establishing themselves from the 1840s, and they had revolutionized perfumery. They had all, created things that hadn't been seen, like mail to order perfumes. They were innovative when it came to cosmetics. And Rimmel himself then creating this super femme, which is, this idea of having a darker pomade to darken the lashes. And what they used was a blend of coal dust, which is why you hear that charcoal was used around the eyes, and petroleum jelly. And this, with your little coal dust and petroleum jelly brushed onto the eyes. I mean, it was messy, but it did darken the lashes. But it quite revolutionized the spreading of how you would darken the eyelashes throughout Europe, because people hear the word Rimmel, it becomes synonymous with mascara. I mean, if you're on Google Translate and you put Rimmel into Spanish to English, it comes up mascara. And this innovation was massive. I mean, you don't really get anything in the tube or anything on a brush per se until the late 19th century, as you mentioned, turn of the 20th century. But the product itself, darkening the lashes, and using this coal and petroleum blend, I mean, it swept through Europe at the time. And it was something that they knew was happening. People were darkening their lashes and their brows anyway, to achieve the beauty standards that were expected, but may not have always naturally occurred. And the very first brush version was actually not made for women at all. It would have been made for men, for their moustaches. Used a lot in the theatre circles. I mean, we owe a lot to makeup and its history from the theatre. It just didn't always translate into society as much, especially if it was seen as something a little bit inappropriate in society. But we do owe a lot to how much makeup developed to the theatre circles of London, Dublin and Paris. In terms of what Lola thought of eyelashes, she puts it brilliantly that the fringes of the eyes should not be decorated. So obviously what she means is eyelashes. And she suggests just trimming them every 5 to 6 weeks with a little cutting them off at the ends. Don't know how I'd feel about trimming my eyelashes. Speaking then of lips, if we're moving down throughout the face, anything from rose tinted lip salves to carmine use again, to even one source noting red crepe paper that was dampened, and if you blotted it with your lips it would stain you. To Schaefer puts it beautifully, she says calisthenics with your lips, so like really biting them down and pressing on them and moving your lips around quite not violently but quite tersely would create that beast. So if you're really, you know, moving around your lips a lot, they will become, because you're hurting them, so they're going to become red and almost bigger looking to get that fuller rosy look. I don't know if any of your viewers or yourself per se has heard of LBBC Historical. She has created the most amazing products because she's trying to use, and I had her on a podcast that I host, and she was talking about all her latest products that were coming out, and she's amazing. She's such a wonderful, generous human being. She tries to take products that of course no longer exist or cannot be recreated for FDA reasons, and tries to look at the closest thing that can be used or found to create products that achieve the same effect. She's a brilliant one to talk to and a brilliant one to have a conversation with in terms of how you create products now that can be used. But she's a lot of 19th century products, a lot of 19th century cosmetics as well. Some of her stuff is from the 1770s, but a lot of it's from 19th and 20th century. So again, if she's able to recreate now, reinforcing the idea that cosmetics very much existed and were used in the 19th century.
A massive thanks to Laura Fitzachary for sharing her incredible wisdom, and a big thanks to you for watching. See you all in 2 weeks for another video.